As any student of world history would tell you, China underwent massive change throughout the 20th century. Traditions fell and new ideas sprung up to take their place. And throughout all of this, one philosopher was caught up in crucial debates that would shape the future of the country. That philosopher was Hu Shih. Despite playing a role in these major historical changes, Hu Shih remains somewhat of a forgotten philosopher, and it was extremely difficult to access his writings in English. I mean, look at this bullshit. It says English writings in the title, but the language is in Chinese. Still, I've been able to find little snippets of relevant writing for us to explore his biography and philosophy. His early biographical information is coming from this book, where different intellectuals wrote an About Me chapter. You might recognize some of the other names on here. Hu was born in December of 1891. Unfortunately, his father died 4 years later, and his mom solely took care of him at the age of just 23. Now, Hu's mom was hardcore about his education. She started teaching him characters before he was 3, and then when he did enter school, apparently he would stay inside during recess or playtime just so he could learn more. And school was not a joke in itself. Apparently, the average length of a school day was 12 hours. During this time, he was not only able to read, but also memorize books. I can't say I've even memorized one book. And Hu's mom went even further and paid the teacher at his school to get him more in-depth treatment. When he was 13, he left home to seek education on his own in Shanghai. He spent 6 years in Shanghai, and during this time, he went through a bit of an edgy phase. Getting drunk, gambling, being sad and pessimistic, and even getting into a fight with a cop. But then in 1910, he left to study in America, and got hit by American optimism, as he called it. He recalls being at a football game and seeing a lack of dignity in the players and the fans cheering. But then he saw one of his own professors cheering and decided to join in himself, and he just got caught up in that spirit. During this time in China, the Qing dynasty, which had stood since 1636, had finally fallen, and Emperor Puyi was kicked off the throne. There's a fantastic movie about this whole period called The Last Emperor, which goes over his life. But big changes were also happening in Hu Shih's life, as he eventually met and studied under John Dewey, the pragmatist philosopher. Hu Shih fell in love with pragmatist thinking, specifically this experiment style of inquiry. He summarizes it in his essay, John Dewey in China. According to this theory, thinking is not passive and slavish deductions from unquestioned absolute truths, but begins with a situation of doubt, proceeds with a search for facts and for possible suggestions, and terminates in proving, testing, or verifying. And Hu Shih lived this philosophy by turning his sights on traditional aspects of Chinese culture. He criticized classical Chinese language and promoted a more modern, efficient Chinese. He critiqued classic Chinese philosophy, and even gives us a little taste of this in the book by going after the doctrine of the three immortalities. This doctrine states that there are 3 kinds of immortality: immortality of virtue, service, and speech. Hu Shih, following the pragmatist thinking style, saw facts indicating that everything we do is actually in some ways immortal, and thought that this new discovery was better than the classical 3 immortalities doctrine. Hu then returned to China as a professor and participated in the famous May 4th movement, but more importantly, the New Culture movement, where many classical Chinese ideas were criticized, like classical language and Confucianism. So there's this propaganda film called Beginning of the Great Revival, which documents the founding of the Chinese Communist Party, and our boy Hu Shih makes a cameo. He's part of a live debate advocating for the new vernacular language over the classical language. And as you can see, this is the effect he had on the ladies. But during this time of doing away with the old and giving rise to the new, many students began reading Marx and holding communist study groups. According to the film at least, even Mao Zedong attended Hu's classes. Now get a load of this scene in the film. When confronted as to why he didn't support Marxism, Hu compares it to Confucianism in that many people are worshipping it as an ideology that can do no wrong. Hu wants to exercise caution in how we view ideas and theories. They are not absolute truths, but hypotheses to be tested. But then the student says, well, Marxism is different because it's scientific. And guess how Hu responds? He doesn't, because the scene just ends. If we let that scene play out though, I'd imagine he says something like, listen here, you little shit. Even if we assume it's scientific, then you're admitting that it shouldn't be taken as an absolute truth, because scientific discoveries are still not absolute and are subject to further experiments and progressive discoveries. But no, the scene ends and it implies Hu Shih is persuaded by the student. In actuality, Hu Shih became a fervent anti-communist and continued to publish works criticizing it. Obviously, once the communists took power, they were not too happy with his work. Thankfully, Hu left China by then to live in Taiwan, but while away, his works were essentially destroyed by the Communist Party. In 1954 and 1955, more than 3 million words were published for the purging and exorcising of the ghost of Hu Shih. And in almost every violent attack on me, Dewey was inevitably dragged in as a source and as the fountainhead of the heinous poison. Now you might be wondering, sure, purging Hu Shih's work makes sense if he explicitly wrote against communism, but why John Dewey as well? In the same essay, John Dewey in China, Hu goes over two essential parts of pragmatist thinking that he thought were at strong odds with communism and therefore had to be purged. First was the idea that progress in determining truth was patient. Firstly, the progress of man and of society depends upon the patient and successful solution of real and concrete problems by means of the active use of the intelligence of man. Hu believed that this was at odds with communists who thought the absolute and total revolution will come in and lead to overnight progress and prosperity. The second point where pragmatism is at odds with communism is in terms of how to view theories. In this natural and orderly process of rational thinking, all doctrines and all theories are to be regarded, not as absolute truths, but only as tentative and suggestive hypotheses to be tested in use. Now, if you're a hardcore Marxist reader and disagree, keep in mind that Hu is addressing how the Chinese Communist Party is practically acting. These 2 points of pragmatism can be seen as problems for the party in charge of running the country. Hu ends this essay summing up what he thinks is the correct alternative to Marxism or Confucianism or any ism. To be led by the nose of a Confucius or a Hu Shih is not highly commendable, but to be led by the nose by a Marx, a Lenin, or a Stalin is also not quite becoming a man. I have no desire to lead anyone by the nose. Hu later would become the president of Academia Sinica, the National Academy of the Republic of China in Taipei, and from what I can tell, it's still around. He also was the editor for the Free China Journal, which was shut down after it criticized Chiang Kai-shek, the head of the Kuomintang Party which fought against the communists in the Chinese Civil War. Hu Shih passed away in February of 1962 due to a heart attack. In Taipei, there's a Hu Shih Memorial Hall where you could see his residence and his tomb. On Reddit, if you search for Hu Shih, you'll find that Cornell named a residence hall after him. Apparently he's also a character in the video game Hearts of Iron 4, and besides appearing in that one propaganda film, there's surprisingly little references of Hu Shih made today. Despite living an incredible life, he unfortunately might be classified as a forgotten philosopher, unless you're in Taiwan or go to Cornell. But I guess that's one of the big goals of this series, bringing awareness to these philosophers so that their thoughts can continue to echo on today. Remember when Hu Shih critiqued the classical Chinese doctrine of the 3 immortalities? I actually want to end on what Hu Shih wrote about immortality because it relates heavily to this series. The individual self leaves an indelible mark of everything it is and everything it does upon that larger self, which may be termed society, or humanity, or the great being. The individual may die, but he lives on in this great self which is immortal. Hu then shares anecdotes about small insignificant actions playing big roles in this great self. For example, 25 centuries ago, a beggar in the Himalaya mountains died and his body was decomposing. A young prince came across this body and it led him down a series of thoughts. That prince would eventually become the Buddha, and his religion would influence millions of people around the world. To think that this beggar's death contributed to the influence of those millions of people. So hopefully by bringing up these forgotten philosophers, they may have an effect on your life and continue to have influence long after they've passed. Anyways, thanks for listening to me ramble. Comment below your thoughts on Hu Shih and what other forgotten philosophers I should cover. And yes, I will get to Mainlander once I find a good translation at a good price. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more. Share this video with others, and with that I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.